You cannot protect the right to keep and bear arms if we don't protect our Constitution. And the only way we're going to be able to protect our Constitution is protect our borders against foreign invaders of all sorts. In the context of Donald Trump trying to clean up the mess created by Joe Biden's open border policy, Donald Trump has been trying to deport groups of people, including individual green card holders. I want to talk a little bit about deporting green card holders, and I want to tell you about a story which is really kind of shocking, but not really, about how the Chinese are exploiting the birthright citizenship rules with, ready for this, folks? Pregnancy surrogates. Yes, that's right. We're going to talk about all this when we come right back. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the 4-Box Diner, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and I'm proud to say the top voice of the Second Amendment at the 2025 Gundies Awards. Thank you so much for your support. I hope to continue to do good work for the Second Amendment for the rest of this year and beyond. All right, folks, so, I don't really like to talk about these other issues outside of the scope of the Second Amendment, but sometimes we have no choice, because part of it is I'm concerned that some of this law gets very complicated and is not accurately reported by many members of the press. So I want to make sure you're the smartest person in the room. It can dictate kind of the conversation. I want to give you some information that I think is helpful on these other legal cases, because remember, I've explained to you that American law, especially American constitutional law, is one big spider web. It's a tapestry, if you will, and you want to understand how the whole thing works together, because some precedent over on the right side of American law could impact American law on the left side. It all gets interrelated, and this is part of the problem, by the way, why the United States Supreme Court sometimes takes a long time to decide these cases, because they're not just thinking about who should win this particular case. They're also asking the question of, how will this have a ripple effect on other aspects of American law? And sometimes it's hard to predict. And that is a reason why you will see very long Supreme Court decisions dealing with the various questions like, well, what does this mean for these other areas of law? Now, with that said, I want to talk about a couple things that are going on with immigration law. We did a video about the gangs that are being deported, illegal alien gangs that are being sent to El Salvador and the like. I've already done that video. I want to talk just generally about some of these green card holders. Because you probably have seen me on Fox News a couple times talking about this, but I want to talk specifically to you so I can give you the dirty details here. Now, in the world of immigration, you have different kinds of immigrants. Some immigrants come in on visas. For example, if you fly to the United States and you just want to tour around for a couple months and see the world, see what America has to offer, you can get what's known as a tourist visa. We're going to talk about how that gets exploited according to reports by Chinese immigrants or Chinese tourists in a few minutes. But for now, just understand that's one visa. Now, if you come here and try to become a permanent resident of the United States, you can get what's known as a green card, which is basically you're a permanent resident. You're not an American citizen, but you are indeed here in the United States legally, and you're considered by and large a permanent resident. A permanent resident. Now, here's the thing. If you have a green card, you're still an immigrant. You're not a citizen. It's still a privilege to be in the United States. You don't have all the same rights as an American citizen yet, because you're not quite a citizenship. But if you do get the green card, it's a major step toward eventually becoming an American citizen. Now, recently, there's been some high-profile cases involving academics, people involved with universities, a guy named Mahmoud Khalil, another guy called Badar Khan Sori from India. A couple of these cases where they're affiliated with either Columbia University or I think it was Georgetown, as I recall. And basically, these are green card holders, but Donald Trump has announced through his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, that he wants to deport these individuals and some other people and take away their green card status. Now, obviously, the anti-Americans, anti-Trumpers are trying to stop this, because the first thing they like to do is to replace American citizens with anybody else so they can win elections. That's obviously their plan. That's why they wanted to flood the country with tens of millions of foreigners to try to replace American heritage, American culture, which includes, of course, the right to keep and bear arms and the culture of private gun ownership for the purposes of self-defense and the like. They wanted to replace all of that American culture with something else. Now, with that said, Donald Trump is trying to kick these people out, and I just want to talk to you briefly about how that can be done. Once someone has a green card, it's a little bit harder to kick them out of the country than if you're obviously an illegal alien and you're not allowed to be here. But you can still lose your green card because, as I said, a green card is really a document that gives you the privilege to stay in the United States. It's not a right, it's a privilege. It's no different than if you invite me over to your home and I can hang out in your home, and then at some point you can revoke my privilege to be in your home and say you have to leave now, Mark. And now I might do things that offend you that if your kid did, you still wouldn't be able to kick him out because he lives in the home and he's a resident of the home, so you wouldn't be able to kick the kid out. But if I go over there and offend you in the same way, you can kick me out because I don't have a right to be in your home like, let's say, your child does. I just have the privilege. So that's how do you view these green card holder immigrants. They're still in the context of being invited into a country with the privilege to be in the country. They don't have the right. Now, under what's known as the Immigration and Nationality Act, it's called the Immigration and Nationality Act, there's a whole list of ways that people with green cards can get their butt booted out of the country. Now, some of the, you can get committed, for example, if you convicted of some serious crimes and all this kind of stuff, you get kicked out. But there's other ways that you can also get kicked out that Marco Rubio, as the Secretary of State, is using here, because the people that they're kicking out are not people who've committed crimes. These are people, though, who, in the opinion of the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has concluded that their continued presence in the United States is a potential problem. It could have serious adverse foreign policy consequences for our country, and thus they need to go. So specifically, the relevant provision, or one of the relevant provisions, reads as follows. The Secretary of State has reasonable ground to believe that the presence of or activities in the United States of such alien would have potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the United States. It means they can then be deported. Now, what are some of these examples? Well, there's a whole bunch of examples given in the law, and people talk about. One aspect is, does this individual engage in terrorism, or does he support terrorist groups? Now, obviously, the argument here is that one of the big terrorist groups out there today that the United States is really fighting against is Hamas. Those are the people that perpetrated the October 7th attack on Israel a few years ago, and Hamas obviously is sort of part of the Palestinian state movement, and so on and so on. We don't need to get into that Middle Eastern politics, but the bottom line is the President of the United States, Donald Trump, thinks that supporting Hamas is the same as supporting a terrorist organization, which is clearly correct. And that's the argument is that these various individuals with green cards have done things to encourage, to promote, to support, to show their sympathy with these terrorist groups, including Hamas. That's the argument. And again, the big question here, just to put this into context, the big question presented is this. Who gets to make the decision? Hear what I just said? Who gets to make the decision? Is it my opinion and my findings that these people support Hamas, they support terrorists, they sympathize with terrorists, they do something against American interests? Is it my opinion? Is it your opinion that counts? Is it the court's opinion that counts? If so, which court? Is it the Secretary of State's opinion? Is it the President's opinion? You see what I'm saying? Who makes the determination, the final determination, that someone is whose continued presence in the United States could give rise to serious adverse foreign policy consequences to the United States in various ways? Well, the statute, the Immigration and Nationality Act, specifically says it's up to the Secretary of State. And this gets back to what the fight is that you're reading about in the newspapers, that Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, has laid out in specific detail why he thinks these individuals need to be deported, they should lose their green card and kicked out of the country. And he's the Secretary of State. He's part of the executive branch. They're responsible for protecting our borders. They're responsible for enforcing immigration laws. They're the ones that make these decisions. And keep in mind, they're the ones that are institutionally capable of deciding who that's an illegal alien in the country should be kicked out, because they may know stuff that nobody else knows, because the federal government, including the Secretary of State, has access to sort of state secrets that nobody else would know. So if the CIA is aware of connections between one of these individuals and Hamas or some other connection, we would not necessarily know. The New York Times would not necessarily know. A court might not know that. We would not want that to be made public, but the Secretary of State and the President might have access to, again, CIA or FBI communiques, other information across the world from intelligence services, Who knows, right? The point being that at the end of the day, the right answer when you're dealing with illegal aliens or you're dealing with green card holders that are not American citizens, we're talking about non-American citizens, the right answer is the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, and the people that work for him, including the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, should be making these decisions because they are in the best institutional position to know all the relevant information because they have access to international information that's secret, to top secret communications. You know, the intelligence services for the United Kingdom, the intelligence services for Israel could pick up the phone or reach out to Marco Rubio and his team and say, hey, we just want to let you know we know this information. Check this out. Just want to let you know. Now, Marco Rubio is not going to want to make that public to the press. He's not going to want to make that public in a court. He's just going to want to be able to act on it. And under the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952, which is the year it was enacted, I believe, he is the one who gets to make that decision. Now, what's going on, of course, is that the sort of the anti-Trumpers, the immigrant supporters who want to replace Americans, in my opinion, they want these people in our country. They want as many non-Americans in our country to replace Americans. As far as I can tell, they don't want these people to be deported. They want to fight tooth and nail to keep them in the country, for example. And their argument is that essentially the Secretary of State does not get to make that decision. The supporters here on the other side are trying to argue essentially that courts get to double check. Courts get to second guess the President of the United States. This is all consistent with the ongoing lawfare against the Trump administration, where you see all these lawsuits try to slow down the Trump agenda every single day, because the one thing that President Trump doesn't have a lot of is time. He only has 4 years, and then he's no longer the president. So the one thing that the anti-Trumpers are trying to do is to run out the clock, to do everything possible to suck up another day and another day and another day of the Trump agenda, because every day they can slow him down is another day that Donald Trump cannot accomplish all the things he promised. And that's why they're going to court over these things that, in my view, should be easily decided by the president, by the Secretary of State, and they should be kicked out. So again, that's how to think about the kicking out of the green card holders. Who gets to decide this? The right answer is the president should get to decide this with the Secretary of State's office, and the basis for doing it is if it's adverse to the foreign policy interests of the United States, and if someone is advocating for Hamas or advancing propaganda against the United States, this obviously should be a basis for the Secretary of State to be able to kick people out. So with that said, I do want to bring your attention, this is a shocking story, another example of the abuse of our immigration system. I think it's very important that this information get out. Back in 2006, I wrote a book called Disarmed, where I talk in detail about the conservative battle plan to take back the courts and to take back various aspects of American law. One of the things I talked about in 2006, I was one of the early people that talked about this, was birthright citizenship, which says that non-Americans, when they have babies in the United States, the baby becomes an American citizen automatically by virtue of how the law has been interpreted, misinterpreted in my view, for many decades. And as a consequence of the baby being born in the United States and becoming an American citizen, that serves as an anchor baby to anchor the entire family to the United States. You know, the parents get to stay in the United States because the baby's there. And I've been arguing that's totally inconsistent with the language of the 14th Amendment. We'll see what the Supreme Court says on that. But the reason why I want to bring this up is to tell you a shocking story that's now being reported about another sort of abuse of the immigration system and this birthright citizenship. The story is going, and I'll try to put some links to in the description below of this video. The way that the argument is reported, the way this is being reported is, historically, foreign nationals would come to the United States on visas, and the woman would be pregnant. She would come to the United States. She would and they would come here legally on, tourist visas or whatever it is, student visas. They'd come to the United States. They'd have a baby, and then they'd have their anchor baby to anchor the family to the United States with the anchor baby who's now an American citizen. But there's a new twist on this, and I have to give these people credit for figuring this out, because I didn't figure this out, maybe because what I'm about to say didn't really exist in the same way in 2006, and that is the use of surrogacy or gestational carriers. And what do I mean by this? For those of you who are not familiar how this works, you have this sort of thing called in vitro fertilization, where basically you have a man, you have a woman, they bring the sperm and the egg together in a petri dish. You then fertilize and create an embryo. Then you take those embryos, these fertilized embryos, and you plant one or more of them in a third-party person called a gestational carrier. That gestational carrier then carries that embryo to term and gives rise to giving birth to a baby. Hear what I just said? You're involving 4 people in what I just said. You've got the father who provides the sperm. You've got the mother that provides the egg. Okay? Then you bring them together in some sort of a petri dish, and at that point, you have an embryo. You then take the embryo, or the baby, right? The embryo, the fertilized embryo. You then plant it in a third person known as a gestational carrier. The gestational carrier female, biological female, carries that embryo to term and gives rise to the birth of a baby. So you got the mom, you got the dad, you got the gestational carrier, and then you got the baby. So what apparently is now happening, this is breaking news, this is just occurring now. Well, it's been occurring, but no one caught it until just recently, and that's this. We have Chinese families allegedly are coming to the United States. They're going through this in vitro fertilization process, this IVF process here in the United States. They're creating the embryos in the United States. They're Chinese babies being created via embryos in the United States. Those embryos are being planted in or implanted into American women to serve as the gestational carrier to take the embryo, carry it to term, and then the gestational carrier gives birth to the Chinese baby, but here in the United States. And now that Chinese baby is an American citizen, even though both parents are loyal to and full-blown Chinese citizens, for example, loyal to the Chinese government. But now they have a baby in the United States, and under the birthright citizenship rules, currently, that baby is an American citizen and serves as the anchor baby for the Chinese parents to be attached to the United States moving forward. Now, I believe it's reported that these are Chinese couples, although I'm assuming that there's all sorts of other nationalities that are doing this, but the early reports are of Chinese couples that I've read, but I'm assuming there are other nationalities that are doing the exact same thing, which is to use these gestational carriers in the United States. These are American citizen females in the United States who are carrying the babies to term, giving the birth to the babies, and creating the anchor babies for the foreign national parents. So again, there's a lot broken in our American immigration system, and it's all about replacing Americans with non-Americans. There's a lot of money, a lot of people on the other side of this, and I'm glad to see Donald Trump is fighting hard, and I hope when it comes to these green card holders that Marco Rubio has concluded don't serve any good interest to be here in the United States and are actually adverse to American interests. I hope they get deported. That is the ultimately right decision, if that's what the President and the Secretary of State have concluded. All right, folks, so I hope you learned something here today, a little bit about immigration and deportation and, gestational carriers and how you get around with the birthright citizenship loophole. And again, I appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you follow me on X at @4boxes, and don't forget to subscribe on YouTube and Rumble, and I look forward to talking to all of you again very, very soon here at the 4 Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.